I feel like anyone who's an advisor who they're offering services, they look like a commodity compared to anyone else that might offer services. But when you Google that person's name, because if you're going to trust someone with your life, you're going to Google them, right?
Yeah.
Google Kim Butler, we see this whole thing show up which just looks way better, right? Because you've earned it, not because I'm good at digital marketing. When I think of life insurance, especially whole life insurance, I think about salespeople that are wearing suits, that have slick hair, and they're kind of like used car salespeople. And you're the exact opposite, because you're a math and engineer and trust and facts kind of truth guy. I love the name Truth Concepts.
Well, thanks. It's one of those things that was kind of put out there initially and it just stuck. It was like, oh, and it's kind of a binding term, right? We've got to make sure everything is absolutely right when you call your company that. And that's kind of where that came from, because there's in the financial industry, there is so much misinformation, which is weird. You'd think, it's based on math, right?
Yeah.
So
how do you trick people? Well, Las Vegas is it's about math too, but people make all kinds of mistakes.
Good point. And, there's some similarity from the gambling side that people do with their money, isn't there? I mean,
Very
without
similar.
the certainty pieces, but there's also a cool thing, I think, about, kind of an analogy in the gambling side. And that is, we all need spice of life, right?
Yeah.
Certainty is boring, and it doesn't fit the human condition. A good friend of mine in the industry, and he helps us with the prosperity economics movement, Patrick Donahoe, when we were first putting some principles together, one of the things that he talked about was he wanted to bring a principle in of uncertainty. And I initially thought, well, wait a second, that's kind of weird. That's just the opposite of certainty, right? And it's like, no. You can have certainty, and there's also a principle of uncertainty, and uncertainty is spice of life, right? I mean, who goes to Vegas and doesn't know that the house holds the better hand, right? But still we go, or still people go, because they enjoy that bit of uncertainty that exists there. But it's kind of like on a roller coaster. I talk about that from time to time. You can get on a roller coaster because it's exciting, but you still put your seatbelt on, and that's that certainty aspect, right? And I think with finances, oftentimes if we have certainty to protect some of our uncertainty choices, you can take anything, real estate, the market, all these things on paper, but there's always those unknowns, right? We don't know if a hurricane's going to come through, if the market's going to fluctuate and we're not going to have renters. But if we have a certainty asset, it can protect that uncertain choice. And so really it turns, without the uncertainty asset, is pure gambling. We might get lucky, right? But if we have that certainty asset there, now then it's opportunity, right?
Yeah. I had Dick Hayen, who was the chairman of Allstate Insurance, as a mentor, super lucky. And he explained to me insurance is like a lottery with large negative prizes.
Yeah.
You don't want to win that lottery, but it's good.
No, that's right. Nobody wants to collect on that, do they? Right?
And then you may know, one of the biggest gamblers in the world. I spent over $1 billion in what I think is the world's largest casino, which is Google Ads. But that's positive risk. I love that kind of risk because I win most of the time.
Sure. But you've got some certainty behind it, right? Because you know how that system works, right?
And I built a lot of calculators like you. And I started doing this in about 1990. You were doing it in 1986. So you've been doing it you're going to be, what is it, like 36 years now?
Yeah.
38 years? You're going to be up on 40 years now.
That's crazy. I can't believe that. And when I started it was right when the IBM PC came out. I mean, we literally had a computer, one of the first ones I was working on in the office, with a single 5 1/4 inch floppy drive.
Back in the day, like punch cards. I remember when I got my first HP 12C, like in 90 or 80. No, that was like 88 or so. And that was the thing, because it was a scientific calculator. It wasn't a TI-84.
No, what's funny is, because I grew up on the HP 12C, in this business, I use it to check numbers I get from Excel, just to make sure that everything else is doing right. That's become my standard. I keep one in my computer bag. I have a software version of it on my phone that I use all the time.
Yeah. I have a finance degree.
Oh,
I'm
really?
a software engineer, kind of like you.
That's funny because you know what my degree's in?
Biology.
Biology.
And you use it all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm really fortunate that I ended up in this industry because I love this industry, but it happened on accident. And I think a lot of people get in certainly to the insurance side pretty much on accident, right?
Yeah. I look at you and Kim Butler and Caleb Guilliams, who introduced us, as kind of like the odd birds in the world of financial services or services in general. And let me tell you why. And I'd love to hear what you think. So I view you as kind of like a doctor, where everyone else is a witch doctor with Ouija boards and voodoo dolls and, weird chicken bones interpreting whatever. Because you have these calculators. Like imagine 300 years ago, before there was modern medicine, and people were going to, and the high priest or whatever, and they were doing witchcraft, trying to figure out what to do about their situation, these life situations, right? Someone had a kid. Should we get married? What should I do with my life? And they consult the witch doctor, the oracle. But you come in and you are, let's say 300 years ago, you came into these villages and you had an MRI and you could take people's blood and you could look at real, factual, provable data and make a diagnosis. And based on that, provide a recommendation, a treatment plan of what they should do with their life based on their particular situations, not just take 2 sugar pills and call me in the morning.
Right.
And you come in, not because you're a great salesperson or your hair is really good. I love the Hawaiian kind of shirt you have, but because you come in with the facts that anyone who is credible can agree, like, yeah, I can plug in the numbers. I can look at your blood. I can look at the x-ray and I can determine, like, clearly based on a standard set of logic that, the way the banks work, the way the human body works, the way the skeletal structure, cardiovascular system works. That's the play to biology. I'm trying to tie to the biology.
Right.
It's inarguable. When I do an IRR calculation on the HP12C, that's the number. Yeah, I plug in the numbers and the IRR is 5%, right?
You mean there's no gray?
That's why I love math. I competed in math competitions. I flew around and did math contests because I love the certainty.
Sure.
If you and I were at the same elementary school, I think I would have been pulled into I would have joined you on what you're doing, building truth concepts back in 1986. Because I love how you are and correct me if this is like offensive, but you're shining the light in a dark room. You're turning the light on and people are getting mad. And don't get mad at the light. Don't get mad at the scale, right? Get mad at like you can see things for what they are, right? So you don't have to sell people. You're merely just revealing to them through the truth. So you have to provide the tool, but you have to provide the associated training. Otherwise a surgeon, right, someone who declares themselves to be a surgeon because they bought the latest scalpel is not qualified to do surgery. They have to it's not because they have that scalpel, that brand of scalpel. It's because they know what they're doing too.
Yeah. And I think there's another piece, and that is that surgeon needs to be able to take the pure facts and expound that out to what the situation is around that client. Because it could say different things in different arenas, different environments, right? And that's what needs to happen as the advisor. Yeah, we have the pure math, but what does the pure math look like in this particular client situation? What is their risk of doing this? Yeah, the math may say, take all your money, pay off all your debt, but now you've left that person in a tremendous amount of risk if something comes along they didn't expect. So you have to balance all those pieces in there.
Yeah.
And the funny thing, just to continue on with your analogy there, is, can you imagine, let's say that you're a surgeon and you're at a cocktail party, somebody finds out you're a surgeon. Can you imagine somebody coming up to you and saying, hey, I have some extra money laying around, and I was just wondering, what kind of surgery do you think I ought to get?
Oh, I'll offer you a heart surgery, but Todd, if you buy now, I'll offer you a liver surgery for half off. But you have to buy it by Friday.
Isn't that funny? I mean, you'd say, okay, that's totally ridiculous for somebody to ask it. Even more ridiculous for the surgeon to answer it. But in the financial industry, that happens all the time. People say, hey, I've got some money. Where do you think I ought to invest it? And they expect an answer. And it's like, no, as an advisor, you cannot Answer that question. The only answer you can give is, well, it depends. I need some more info, what your situation is, and you look like you're ducking out on the answer.
Yeah. We need to have a plan first. It's like, cab driver, how much is it going to be? Where do you want to go? I don't know. First, tell me how much it's going to be, and then I'm going to decide where I'm going to go. We need to have a plan first. Why don't you answer my question? I'm merely asking you, how much does it cost? No, really.
Right.
Do you want to go to the airport? Do you want to go to the casino? Do you want to go to your friend's house? Where do you I need to know where you want to go first. Then let's figure out the Google Maps, how to get there.
Perfect. And it is. It's a very unique industry, I think, in that respect, because you can almost do that in other places, right? Just not
if
not
it's
so
sales
much
driven.
Here.
But I love the idea of money and goals and your life. There's nothing more pure and more valuable than that. I mean, I just want to know, Todd, how does it feel that you are equipping a whole industry of financial advisors to be able to use these calculators to create measurable improvements in their clients' lives, which is kind of initially a sales tool, I guess, because the advisor can sit down with the client and use the calculators and figure out a plan. But really, it's like a life calculator and helping them improve their life in a measurable sort of way. How does that feel? That you're equipping these folks to clearly provide value, so any fees they have are not seen as fees anymore. And instead of being seen as a salesperson, they're seen as a trusted advisor, because it's not because they have these tools. It's because the client can see how you plug in the life situation details, and we can clearly see a plan that makes sense. And the advisor can explain how it makes sense. It's not because the advisor is really good at using spreadsheets.
Right. And that's the big picture, right? And it's explaining that whole piece all the way through. And I think what happens a lot of times in the financial world is we look at, hey, we could do this and improve your position. Well, we can improve it, but can we fix it? I mean, not that people need fixing, but my point is, are we looking at it all the way through? Did this actually solve what the client wanted to do? And are we afraid to tell the client, no, this is not going to get you there. We need to look at a different path. Or do they just want to sell what it is they're selling?
I think that's a key difference. So, I've been using this kind of medical doctor factual truth calculator analogy, but a key difference is that in the modern medical system, the doctor is not there to say, you know what, you need to change your lifestyle. You can't be working so hard and you're fat. You need to lose weight. Instead, the medical system is there to remove the impediments of your bad behavior so you can continue to do your bad things, right? So you got a heart attack and all that. We're going to give you a bypass or a stent, or we're going to give you some medication for your high blood pressure. But I, as the doctor, don't have the right to get in your face and tell you what you need to change with your life. You have the calculator, and you actually are willing to get in people's faces and advise them on, well, if you go this way, this is what will happen. But you should maybe consider doing this.
Right. And here's the results of that. You choose. I'm not selling you something. I'm not going to sell you a bill of goods. Look, would you like to see what your path looks like?
In 30 years, this is what happens if you keep behaving this way.
Right. And it could be good or that could be bad, depending on what the situation is, right? But being able to see it all the way through, I think, is a big part of what's going on, and in an understandable way. I think another place that we see an interesting dilemma in the financial industry is the idea of confusion. If you confuse your client enough as an advisor, they'll just do what you tell them to do, even though they have no idea what they're doing. And I think we've got to get back to the core of actually bringing our clients along in the process, right?
Yeah. So I see the advisor is kind of humanizing the calculator, because it's not like you have any secret math that no one else can understand how to calculate what happens if you save it this amount, put in this amount, and spend it over here. There's no magic. It's not like there's intellectual property, but not in the secret kind of way, right? But I think it is that you're equipping these advisors to make it more relatable on what this means in terms of life impact.
Yes, in a way that's understandable. One of the things I talk about when we have our truth trainings, our class, which is really, we go through the software, but it's bigger than that. It's like, what does this mean? What is it in the industry? What are all the pieces and parts? What are all the ripples, right? Mm-hmm. And I think in that process, we have to really be able to explain that in a simple term. And one of the things I tell people is, your clients don't need to know everything you need to know. Now, there's two ways to look at that. Some advisors say, oh, well, then I don't need to know that much. No, that's not what I said. What I said was you need to know it all the way through, but your client needs to know how it works. What is the end result? What are those pieces and parts? They don't need to know how the sausage was made, right? But they need to understand the process.
Yeah. So what is the underlying client? So for those of us that work in the sausage factory, what is this? What are some details about how the sausage is being made that the underlying client might not realize?
Ooh, that's a good question. So there are. Do they need to know that every decimal place was used? Do we need to take them through all of the math, all the way down on all the stages, all the way through? Or do we need to step back a little bit and let's look at this across a time frame and see if this option is better than this option? Not every calculation that happened in that process, right? Not every spice that was put into the sausage, not all those pieces and parts. Let's just look at results that can be understood, that can be simplified but still be true. And see, that's a tight line too, because a lot of times that simplification takes away some of the truth, some of the details. So we have to have that balance in there where we're getting enough detail so the client makes a valid decision, an educated decision, without having to be bogged down in the mire of how who created the math in the first place, right? We don't need to go back to Galileo and Newton and whoever else, right?
The funny thing, Todd, is I have a background in math and finance. I was either going to go to Wall Street or the internet, and I chose the internet path. But the Wall Street path, the training that I had, which was to do that, I learned that you can use a spreadsheet to make it say whatever you want by backing into the numbers. And what I especially see from evaluating business plans is they make these assumptions that at the end, they have some gigantic number that compounds, right?
Yep.
Into some, all of a sudden you have $100 million after 30 years.
Right, which is something
what
that
does it say
nobody...
that the advisor or whatnot, or the wishful thinking client doesn't want to just like plug in the numbers in such a way to like back into some number that's not really realistic because of like oversimplifying on assumptions.
Yeah. And that's the way a lot of financial plans were initially created. So some of the big financial plans in the early days, it was all about, well, we didn't get to the number we want. Okay, so let's just turn inflation down a little bit and see if that gets us there. Like that's going to really be possible to do something like that. So they were totally artificial. And I think that one of the things, here's what we know. What I will guarantee is that none of these numbers are going to come out like this over 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, right? Because we know the environment's going to change. So if we know the environment's going to change, what we're doing is literally looking out there and saying, if it doesn't change, this is what it looks like. So we're on the right path, on the right trajectory. But we can't put our clients where they're locked up in something that they can't shift, because we know they're going to have to shift. We're going to have options where we can change with whatever happens in the environment. And so many of those plans lock clients into a place where, if everything goes perfect, you're going to come out. Well, it's never going to be perfect. We look at 9/11, we look at COVID, we look at all these things that have happened, these major things in the last several years. And people say, well, we had no idea that was going to happen. We would have, everything would have worked great if we had just known that was going to happen, or if that didn't happen. Look, we didn't know exactly what those were going to be, but we knew something of that magnitude would happen because it's happened over and over and over again, and you can expect it in the future. That's the point of the black swan events, right? I don't know what it's going to be, but I can guarantee you there's going to be something as big as COVID in the next 10, 15 years or sooner, and that's going to continue in that process. So we have to be flexible, right?
Yeah. The black swan events of maybe the U.S. is no longer, the dollar is no longer the reserve currency.
And it is kind of funny when people talk about stuff like, well, what happens if the dollar goes away? Okay, well, let's just think about that. How's that going to change your life? And what does that really mean? So let's put it back in perspective and realize all we can do is what we can do, right? Based on what we know today.
Yeah. And you just have to outrun the other guy. As long as you do better than why are you running away from the bear? Because I can run faster than you.
But
so what are some things, you talk to a lot of financial advisors. You have the perspective of training lots of people in the financial industry. I've seen you spend time with Garrett Gunderson or Caleb Guilliams or other folks. I researched you on YouTube and I said, dang, this guy Todd Langford's been on so many podcasts. I don't think I can ask him a question that hasn't been asked. But what are the things that financial advisors don't know right now?
I think it's an evolving piece. And I think if you don't have a way to really check out the math, you'll get sucked up in the gimmicks, because there's a lot of them out there and they sound really good. And I'm always open-minded. So I'm constantly looking at stuff. People send me stuff and say, hey, what about this deal? This is a great way to pay off your mortgage in 7 years instead of... And they do it without any additional money and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, okay, I will look at it with an open mind. Maybe there's something that's been created that I just haven't seen yet. I usually resort to my principles and know probably the direction it's going, but I'm always willing to look. And in that process, it always comes out, or usually comes out, to the same kind of a thing. Well, their use of no more money means no more money than you've actually earned. Well, you can't spend more money than you've actually earned. It doesn't mean not putting more money against the mortgage or whatever else. So there's just an example of some of the things that come out. And if you don't have the tools to check the math, it's easy to get sucked up in that, because they oftentimes, to get the gimmick to be understood, to be believed, they have to put it through a lot of convolution so that you lose track of what's going on. There's an old story, and I don't know if you've heard this or not, but there's these three guys and they're playing cards and they decide, hey, let's buy a pizza. Okay, so they throw $10 into the hat and they call the pizza place. Pizza guy shows up with a pizza and says, hey, I was able to find a coupon for you guys. And the coupon gives you $5 off. Cool. So they take the $5, they give $2 to the pizza delivery guy. Each one of them gets $1 back. Okay, so now they've spent $9 a piece, right? So 9 times 3 is 27, plus the 2 that went to the pizza guy. That's only $29. Where'd the other dollar go? See, so convoluted in the story, you lose track of what's happening in the story.
What happened to the other dollar?
Math a lot of times. So here's what actually happened. All right. They only spent what they spent. The fact that they got $1 back, none of that really is part of what happened. They all threw $10 into the pot. They got a $25 pizza and they paid the guy $2. And that's the bottom line. It's the whole $30 is there. It just, when you start to add pieces to it, you lose track of what's happening. And the fact that 3 times 9 is 27 didn't have anything to do with it.
That's so funny. Yeah. That's a good little math conundrum, huh? I view it like there's no single, like, what's the magic vegetable I can eat to lose 10 pounds in 10 days?
Yeah.
And the fact that you have calculators that are based on fundamental principles of math, like math is never going to change, even in 100 years from now, whatever the latest.
Right.
Because there's only so much money and it only can be spent in so many ways and allocated so many ways. I like your pizza analogy a lot.
But it's funny. There's people try to apply in the financial world. They try to take grade school math and expand that into the financial world. And those are totally different things, because grade school math is all about right now. 10 times 50 is 500. But if that 10 is 10 years, then what is 50 per year over 10 years. That's a whole different calculation. You can't just add that up because you've introduced a third dimension, and that third dimension is time, and that totally takes financial math away. But people try to use grade school math and just add up stuff that happens over time, and you can't do that. It goes back to what you were talking about these huge calculations out there in the future, and you look at this huge sum of money that nobody can relate to, and yet that's what's happened over time up to this point. Right? Yeah. People 30 years ago couldn't imagine that it would take the amount of money it takes today to pay their bills, right?
So are there more calculators in the works that you need to build?
I'm actually trying to polish what we have and make it and simplify and make it more relatable. And so that's really the focus of where I'm going at this point. I have most of the stuff in place to explain a lot of the pieces and parts of how every asset works. One of the things that happens too in the financial industry is unequal comparisons. What I mean by that is like the net return of one asset to the gross return of another asset without considering all of the pieces, the extra cost that might be on one asset over another. So this one may have a higher rate of return, but it also may have more taxes or fees or other things around it that aren't included
Greater
in that
risk.
So now then you're on different playing fields, right?
Yeah. Apples and oranges. I wish there was like a single beta variable to boil it down to.
But I think there can be. And that's part of what we've done with the software. That's a big part of, we can analyze any asset and look at all the ripples. Okay, so that's great on the surface. Let's look at what this boils down to. And when we net everything out, where are we now after all the costs have been paid for in both of these instances? And what are the additional benefits that might be on one that doesn't even exist on the other? How does that play a role in the big picture, right?
So the reasoning and understanding the hidden assumptions and understanding the inputs and being able to coach and train, the advisor being a trusted advisor for the client. I feel like that part is where there's more value being created, such that even if AI is able to rebuild your calculators or whatever, the value add of truth concepts is actually ironically even greater with these AI tools, because it emphasizes the humanity and the logical thinking about understanding someone's situation. The analysis becomes more important than the tool.
Yes, it is that bridge between the math and the real world. That is the role of the advisor, and a robo-advisor can't do that part. They can show you the pure math, maybe, but they can't make that separation, that bridge that says, but in your situation, the math is a little bit different because of your risk position, because of where you are with your kids, because of all these unknowns that are out there that the advisor can make that bridge with and determine, do we go by the pure mathematics, or do we understand the math and realize in your situation we need to do something different, at least for a little while, until we can get you out of a risky position?
Do you think that advisors are inherently scared of tools? Maybe if they're more people oriented and they have this phobia of math, and they see someone like you who's got this 38-year background in math and building algorithms and sheets and data?
It depends on the advisor. And I think in the financial industry, a lot of advisors are wired as salespeople. They're people, if that makes sense. They like talking to people. And sometimes there's a division there of how mathematical somebody who's more relatable in a conversation is. And so, it kind of takes both. An ideal scenario is that advisor that's a good upfront, good people person that can relate those pieces and parts, but have somebody behind them that's actually doing the math. That can be hugely beneficial. Somebody that actually tears down to the numbers, makes sure what the advisor is saying is spot on, and then they're relating it to the clients in an understandable way. So but there are people that are wired both ways as well. So it just depends.
Or if you're just a one-man show, you can be ambidextrous.
Yep, absolutely.
And do it on the fly.
Yes.
While you're sitting down, using the calculators while you're sitting with the client, looking at their situation. And that's actually the best deal closer, because it's right there. You can't argue with the math.
Yeah. Yep. And so the math needs to be right, but it doesn't drive all the decisions all the time. How's that? Seems kind of weird, but especially from somebody like you that comes from that background of understanding the math and the fact that it's purely black and white, right? It has to be this way. There's no gray. But I thought it was interesting when you were talking about your decision on which way you were going into the Wall Street world or into the web world, but the same problem exists. There's a lot of truth in the web, and there's a lot of stuff that isn't true. So what do you do there? As somebody who's looking for truth, you have to sort through that stuff that's not true and figure out a way that what you're finding is truth. Okay, the same thing exists in the financial world, even with it based in math. There's little twists. One of the things I like to say is, because most of the time the math is right? 3 + 2 is 5, but the formula is wrong. Okay, that's where the difference is. And I think the same thing happens on the web, or information that we get from the web often, right?
Yeah. We call it lies, damn lies, and statistics. And I found in the world of the internet, especially with companies that I advise that raise money, you can twist the X and Y axis to make any chart look the way you want and change assumptions, like you said, with interest rate or how likely a deal, like how likely that sale is going to close, how much you're going to sell your company for, how much margin's actually occurring, but not taking into account, external factors, things like that. And I found that there's this false safety in spreadsheets and numbers, because if you start with these, if you back in the whole idea of like backing in to the number that you want, instead of starting with an honest, neutral assessment of your situation, so then you can actually see if here's the 3 different choices and let's understand the pros and cons. I found that the understanding of the pros and cons in any situation, honestly evaluating risk factors, especially in your blind spot, when you have a smart advisor that can help you with that, is more important than the calculation of exactly how many decimal points you take that thing to on how many years.
Yes.
And thus, I feel like you are making it easier for advisors who truly care about their clients and are people to be able to get to that clarity of those situations without the impediment of technology.
Yeah, I totally agree.
People. Better people.
Yeah, and the thing about it is, the advisor who doesn't like going through the math with clients, they'll be able to, if they understand it, they'll have the confidence to be able to relay the truth to their clients even without that. And quite honestly, most of the time, clients know if the advisor knows what they're talking about or not.
Yeah.
Right? And I think for the advisor, they don't have to get out and prove, and that's the last thing you want to do is prove your client wrong about something that they think is right. And it's just not going to help you, and it's not going to help them. Nobody's going to come out ahead. But if you know how the math works, you can separate from that when talking to a client, and your client is going to know that you've done the work. They're going to hear it in your voice. They're going to know in the recommendations, they'll make sense. They're not this pie in the sky, money for nothing kind of a thing that we hear from a lot of the gimmicks, right?
I think the best financial advisors and the best salespeople or entrepreneurs are the best storytellers, because I've trained up so many CMOs and heads of digital, and we're known for data. So we do this thing we call digital plumbing, which you know about, which is collect all the data and make sure it ties together so we're accurately measuring conversions. And I find that when we present volumes of spreadsheets to these business leaders, their eyes glaze over. But when we tell the story saying the reason why sales increased 30% over last quarter is because we opened up our targeting to include women who like to shoot guns. Like, we have one client and they make $65 million a year selling basically insurance for gun owners. And we opened it up to tell all these different stories. And we tell the story about how this one ad perform better because it resonates with this audience, because Jack Daniels, we had as a client for a few years, they launched the Tennessee honey as a flavor, and we told a story about how this appealed to inner city neighborhoods and people who have more of a sweet, instead of like the hard bourbon, appeals to a younger audience, or the people who'd otherwise have Fireball. They're using and so we're able to tell the story about why people are making decisions and how it fits in with their life. I found that was more powerful. And of course, the numbers have to check out, because if we look at the conversions, look at the data, look at how much we're paying per click, look at, the keywords we're ranking on, that checks out. But I find the advisor, like me as an advisor, as a digital marketing advisor, not a financial advisor, me being able to tell the story from the data requires, ironically, that I go through the tool and I'm competent in using the tool, in case anyone were to audit me. Otherwise, I'm making up stories. That's called lying, right? and tell the story, that allows the executive and the business owner, the client, to be able to figure out what are the other comparable stories and how do we tell that story in a stronger way.
Yeah. You need to know the numbers. Your client doesn't need to know the numbers. They need to know what the results of the numbers are. And that's such a big aha. And so many advisors need to really understand that piece. The financial advisors, like you as an advisor, as a marketing advisor, have figured out, because what happens when you throw all those spreadsheets at them? They get confused. They get afraid to make a decision. It's like, I don't know what this means, but it looks like a lot, and I think I better just stay where I am right now. I don't know what to do with that. You as the marketing advisor or any financial advisor needs to boil that down into something that's consumable, right?
Isn't it funny though, how many financial advisors or marketing advisors are training their clients to become, like, if they're trying to get us, like, I'm not trying to get a certification to sell life insurance. Our clients are not trying to get certifications to do digital marketing.
Right.
Imagine if I went to you or Kim and said, Todd, we're looking at implementing this particular type of container in your Google Tag Manager. Which kind of container variation do you think we should use for event tracking?
Yeah, I'm not qualified to answer that question. I'm sorry. That's what I have you for, right?
And if I was a surgeon and I said, Todd, before we do the surgery, do you think we should use this scalpel or this scalpel? I don't know. What do you think? Would you have more faith in that client because they're being transparent about, you know what, I'm going to watch. I know a lot of surgeons, and this might be a scary thing. You probably know this, but a lot of surgeons, before they do surgery, did you know they go watch YouTube to see how that surgery's done?
And that sounds scary, but there might be something brand new that somebody's figured out works a little bit better or is a little less painful or whatever else, right?
Yeah. That's the sausage being made.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, it is interesting how a lot of industries are related in that fashion, but for some reason in the math world, people think, or in the financial world, they think they need to confuse their clients to get them to do what they want them to do. And it shouldn't be about what we want them to do as an advisor. It should be about what's best for the client. And they need to be involved in the process, right? What happens if you're gone in the future as the advisor? Is the client going to know the direction that they were on, how to continue that process, how to find the right person to replace you to finish that process? And so I think as an advisor, it's our job to have the client understand where they're going, right?
So you've talked to a lot of advisors. Is there a question you wish they would ask?
Ooh, that's a good question that an advisor would ask.
Yeah, because you get asked all kinds of questions, but maybe there's something really important to you that you want to talk about that they miss. Because they ask you all the standard questions about how does this calculator work, or how do I make more money, or how do I generate more leads, or how to use your software better.
I think the biggest question, and it's really outside of what we do, but I have a passion for this industry. So what I'm looking for are people that are committed to saving this industry, because I think it's gotten off track. I think it's gotten way off track. And I think we've got to get back to the core values. And we've got a new advisor that really wants to succeed in the industry. For that advisor to really find out by asking questions what his clients' goals, desires, and all that are, and that comes first. Let's see how we can make that happen for you, Mr. Client. And so really, no preconceived ideas because of what I'm selling and how do I fit that into your world. No, instead, let's go the other way. And it kind of goes back to what you were talking about. Without the end result of what I'm selling as the goal, let's start fresh. What is it you want to accomplish? And let's see how we can make these tools go together. Because most of the time, and it kind of goes back to the certainty we're talking about, people think protection or certainty are on opposite paths for wealth creation, right? Because there's a cost for that. But if we can get that turned around where people understand with the right strategy, we might be able to make $1 do the job of 2 or 3 things, where now everything's actually on a parallel path, going the same direction. And I think if you asked most people, and they don't do it, if you asked most people, they would agree that they would rather have 100% chance of getting to 95% of their target wealth versus a possibility of getting to 100% and a strong likelihood of way less than that.
Yeah. Even if they're risk loving.
Yes.
Even if they like to gamble at Las Vegas.
Yeah, absolutely. So those two things don't have to be on opposite paths. Let's devise a strategy. And so, when you think about it, the strategy is the big piece, and I think that's what's left out. Yeah, we want to boil down on I'll call it the micro view, and just look at the asset for all the pieces and parts, all the costs, all the gains, all the benefits of each asset. But we have to step back and see how they integrate. It's the strategy really that makes everything happen. It's not a particular product. The products have been around forever, right? Yeah. That's not what's going to make the difference. It's how we apply the strategy.
It's the chef, not the tools.
I like that. Yes.
Well, I think you're the head chef. What's it like knowing all the other top people in the industry and being a veteran of almost 40 years? Like what kinds of things have you learned? If you want to accelerate the rest of us to be closer to you, what do we need to know?
So the biggest thing is when advisors, what I've seen in advisors' growth, and I've known a lot of advisors, and the industry has definitely a large group of less than ideal people in it, right? But I'm fortunate. I don't see those people. All the people that we're involved with are high integrity people, and what I see in those people, when they switch gears and really step back and take the complication away from what they're doing and communicate with the client and the client's future, it's like their whole job gets easy. And
they're the trusted advisor instead of the sales guy.
Yeah. When you're looking out for the other person's best interest, you know what? You're going to get helped along the way. It's a natural thing that's going to happen. When you focus on your commission and what you're going to make and all that kind of stuff out of each deal, you'll never make it. You'll always struggle until you get to a place where you're looking outside of that and really honestly are looking at the client first.
I first met Caleb Guilliams, I think 5 or 6 years ago. And when I found out that he sold whole life, I instantly put him in the bucket of those other insurance, those people that we were talking about.
Yep.
And then I read his book, The And Asset. And then we spent some time together, and he flew out and he stayed at my house multiple times. And we've traveled the world speaking at conferences. And I got to meet you and Kim at one of his conferences. And I realized this is one of the most mission-driven, ethical, I thought life insurance was like this math calculating what % chance you're going to die, mortality tables kind of thing. And I said, this is one of the most human, relatable, caring, ethical, God-fearing people I've ever met. And he introduced me to other people of the same ilk. And it completely changed how I thought about money and math and life.
Yeah.
Like, how did you come across? I think he just kept approaching you and hassling you until eventually you spent time with him.
No. So Caleb is one of those unique people that is just incredible. When you hear his stories about the way, his chicken, his business,
he's paid $1 per chicken he plucked,
and all these pieces. He's just excelled in everywhere, getting out of school early, finishing with high grades. He's just a very accomplished individual, and I was so impressed with him. So what he did, he had no money. He wanted to look into what we were doing in the industry. He came across us on the web because he was wanting to get into the financial services industry, and particularly into the life insurance side. And he found out where we were having our next training, which was in, I think that was the one we were doing in Birmingham or in that area. And he found out, I don't know how exactly he did it. He found out some of the people that were going to the training, and he called one of the individuals, because he didn't have, I mean, he could barely scrape together money for a flight and other pieces. He called somebody in the training and said, hey, would it be okay if I came and stayed with you because I want to learn this? And he's doing this. I think he was 20, 21 at the time. I mean, there are not a lot of 1-year-olds with that kind of drive and that kind of desire to get to the truth. He's an impressive guy.
Awesome. I'm just honored to be able to spend time with you, Caleb, Kim, and other folks. I can't believe that I'm able to make money hanging around people like you. I would pay money to hang out with you.
And I feel the same way. See, I never would have met you had it not been for Caleb and his event, and what I've learned about that side. And it's so cool because I don't have the brainwidth to be able to handle all of the depth that it takes on the website to do it and do it right.
Yeah.
And we get somebody that's a trusted, known engineer in that field in you that solves that for us. I don't have to worry about that. I know it's being taken care of, and it's being taken care of the right way.
You know what amazes me, and it makes me mad too, is that there's someone like you who's an industry expert, who's ethical, who has the relationships, who has the background and the proof and the track record and the tools and the training, and is well known in the real world. Yet until I Googled you, like you didn't even have a knowledge panel popping up. Have you Googled yourself and did you see the knowledge panel that pops up for you now?
I haven't seen it.
No one showed that to you?
No.
When you Google Todd Langford, a knowledge panel now shows up for you.
Oh, cool.
Showing your bio. This is the stuff that I shared at Caleb's conference a few months ago. Something I promised that we would do for you and Kim.
Thank you so much, because that's just not in my realm, and I know it's important.
You're not a self-promotional kind of guy. You're not out there promoting your brand, but when I see people like you and Kim, where you are sharing knowledge, you have the relationships, you have content that you've produced, but you haven't. It's like this jigsaw puzzle of pieces that are all over the place, and then all we're doing, our team, these young adults and other folks, VAs from all sorts of countries, they're taking these jigsaw pieces. These are pieces you created. We didn't create the jigsaw pieces. You created them. And then we're just we're putting them together in the right way for Google to see it. And now when people Google Todd Langford, they see the bio taking up the whole screen the way it's supposed to be, which is great. And you saw me show you like what Caleb's knowledge panel looks like, right? It's great. And I feel like anyone who's an advisor who they're offering services, they look like a commodity compared to anyone else that might offer services. But when you Google that person's name, because if you're going to trust someone with your life, you're going to Google them, right?
Yeah.
And so now we Google Todd Langford, Google Kim Butler, we see this whole thing show up which just looks way better, right? Because you've earned it, not because I'm good at digital marketing, but because you have already earned it, but no one was there to technically assemble the pieces.
Well, see, and here's what's funny in your language, Dennis. What you say is all we do is put this, we just do this little, it's like that stuff I can't do. I have no brain capacity to be able to put that stuff together. What you do is phenomenal in that arena, and you know what the results are going to be and how that works. And I think you have a natural ability to do that, and I think sometimes maybe you don't see how.
Well, I've been doing it for 30 years, but you've been doing this for 30 plus years as well. And I'm sure like you and I, Todd, are, you know that movie Groundhog Day?
Oh, yeah.
I feel like it's Groundhog Day for you and I every day, right?
Yeah.
Because we've seen it so many times. It's like stunningly obvious.
Yeah.
But I have to step back sometimes, because then I'll say something and it's like, well, obviously we're going to do this, this, and this. And I'm like, whoa. You've been this. I did not understand.
Nothing obvious about it, right?
Yeah, I get. Okay. You got me.
My grandfather used to say when we do something, it's like, how do you know to do that? Everything's easy when you know how to do it, right?
Right.
And I think there's a lot of truth to that. You get to a place once you've gotten through the hard part of how to do something, and you've done it enough times. Like you said, you can see the big piece. It's kind of like the Matrix. You know, Matrix movie when all of a sudden there's just these lines going across there and ones and zeros and they're describing what the image looks like because they've seen it enough times. And I think that's where you are as that master on that side. You know what the solution is based on all those pieces that, again, for most people are just scraps of paper, right?
Well, you and I can see the zeros and ones and the woman in the red dress, right?
Yeah.
You and I look at the data and we can instantly see the picture, and other people, good luck. GPT can try to figure that out.
Yeah. It's fine.
Awesome. And because you've done things enough times, you've productized it into a tool. I would argue, and let me know if you agree, that if you didn't have this experience, you couldn't have built the calculator. It wasn't because you're a great engineer or mathematician. It's because you understand inherently the logic of having done it that you were able to program those rules.
Yeah. And I was very blessed with my beginning in an industry, again, that I got into by default. It wasn't on purpose, but my mentor, Norman Baker, was somebody who understood financial math at a different level. And some of that was taught in the old days, and there's none of that going on now from any of the, financial companies. They're not teaching anybody anymore. But in those days, I remember going into a bank one time and talking to the bank president and teaching the bank president something about math, about the way they were making money inside of the bank. And the bank president ended up at the end of it saying, "Would you do me a favor?" And we said, "Well, sure. Would you not tell the board that I didn't know this?" Right? We were showing him how he was making money, how the bank was making money on a basic amount that they didn't understand. And that's because Norman knew that stuff. And I started in the industry on that right track with somebody who understood and knew the math. And one of the things he told me once, which is, I tell every class over and over this one thing, and that is there are no deals in the insurance industry. And it's such an important piece to understand. And here's the thing, it's all actuarial based. And this could be life insurance, this could be property and casualty insurance, right? They're all using the same actuarial tables of likelihood of things happening, right? So how could one thing be a whole lot cheaper than something else? And the only way that can happen is if the risk is being shifted, either away from the company to make it cheaper for the rates or to the company to make the price higher. And so everything for an insurance company is a trade-off between risk and cost. And if you come across some super deal that's super cheap, you better read the fine print, because it probably doesn't pay off, if there's a snowstorm in December or something when this there's some caveat in there that makes that happen, because again, there's no deals. And when you can understand that, you have a place to go to analyze, okay, why does this look like this? Let's investigate a little bit deeper. Oh, here's where it is. They're shifting this risk to the client or whatever else. Does that make sense?
So it's repackaging of risk, and you're saying it's not like one mutual company has better actuaries than the other, that they calculate to the fifth decimal point instead of the fourth. It's just repackaging of risk. And so with no arbitrage, that it's really in the eye of whoever is buying these packages to understand what the true combinations are.
Right. And it's hard for people to understand that. They're like looking at life insurance policies, just as an example, because I'll go through it with advisors and look at the way this life insurance policy, look at the returns are. And maybe we have one that has a lot of cash value in the early years, and that policy will grow and then it'll kind of coast. It'll sit there several years out where it won't really grow much, and then it'll start growing again. It's like, well, wait a second, why is it coasting there? Well, because they artificially push the values up on the front, and to keep it actuarially accurate and profitable for the insurance company, they had to adjust it later on in the process. And most of the time, because they were doing that, the actual total return is less than if they just had one that was normal and started with a lower cash value and grew over time the way it fit on the actuarial curve properly. But the insurance companies have ways of adjusting their risk exposure, but they've got to catch it up to keep everything in check.
Right. I'll trade my 2 nickels for a dime. I used to take a $10 bill to going to the coin changer and put it in, and I loved hearing the coins rattling in the bottom because I felt like I was winning. But really,
That's
it's
right.
arbitrage. There's no deal.
Yep.
Or there's no
Right.
arbitrage. Yeah. It's
Right.
just the math.
You got it.
Amazing, Todd. It's been a pleasure spending time with you. I learned
Same.
so much. How do any final words? You get the
No,
last.
from, I guess, final words for a client in the industry, I think just make sure you understand what it is your financial advisor is suggesting. Make sure you see the big picture and how that comes together, I think would be a big piece. And for the advisor, don't get sucked up in the gimmicks. Look at the details and make sure it all makes sense when you're talking to your clients. And, there's no deals in the insurance industry, right? So if you're looking
There's
at that
no deals in
it,
the insurance industry. That should be the title.
yeah.
Awesome. Where can people find you?
Truthconcepts.com. And so there's actually at truthconcepts.com, we've got, there's a blog there that's got a tremendous amount of information. There's stuff on the surface of that, but if you go into the blog, there's all kinds of what ifs in there. It's free to go look around, and you can actually download the software. Anybody can. We don't have any secrets. There are clients that come to our advisor training because, and sometimes people say, well, wait a second, how can you have clients in there? What about the secret sauce? There's no secret sauce. We don't talk about anything that a client can't hear. It's all truth, right? So it's all there. And the same thing for the software. So anybody can download it for 30 days. It'll run. They can play around with it, see what they want to do, whether it's client advisor, it doesn't really matter. We don't have anything to hide.
You mean that if it's not that me wanting to be a surgeon, if I can just buy the same scalpel on Amazon, I can be a great heart surgeon too?
There you go.
It's a secret scalpel we have.
But you could practice with it on your steak. How's that?
That's right. And the salmon and my alpacas.
There
my
you go.
68 vet. I'll buy the tools.
Perfect.
Ladies and gentlemen, Todd Langford, the financial wizard behind the wizard of Truth Concepts. You're going to learn so much by following Todd. I hope you will listen to our conversation candidly of what it's like to train up experts. You're going to learn how the sausage is being made. Thank you so much, Todd.
Thank you, Dennis.
Awesome.